They thought pressure would finally break her. That if they tightened their grip just enough, she'd give in, flinch, tap out, black out, or lose control. But Lunkantabara, Sheila Raines, didn't break. Not when her airway sealed. Not when her lungs begged for air. Not even when the man's fingers dug into her neck and realized she wasn't fighting to breathe. She was waiting. Because Navy SEALs don't hold their breath just to stay alive. They do it to outlast anyone who tries to stop them. And when she finally moved, he came up gasping. She didn't. Before we show what the command log captured at the 48-second mark underwater, drop a comment saying where you're watching from, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon on, and don't move. Because this isn't a story about breath, it's about control, and about knowing exactly when to end the fight. The air inside the Bayfield Naval Recovery Center carried its own gravity, cooler than the air outside, scrubbed clean by filtration units, but heavy all the same. Not with sound, with strain. The kind that hung around people trying to prove their bodies weren't done yet. Recovery here smelled of chlorine and metal polish, of sweat mixed with determination and quiet pain. Hodai Shimder Fa Sheila Raines. Moved through that atmosphere like someone who'd learned long ago how not to disturb it. Late 30s, uniform pressed, name patch worn but precise, combat insignias long removed. Her sleeves were rolled halfway in the exact regulation-perfect way that said discipline still lived under the skin. Clipboard in one hand, white medical armband stamped in blue on the other. Limited exertion protocol. The only visible reminder that she wasn't here to command missions anymore, only to observe them. No one truly believed that. Not after her file had made its rounds. SEAL, DevGru, Kandahar, classified incident report, pulmonary trauma, blast overpressure. She never mentioned it. The scar tissue did all the talking. Across the gym, 2 recruits fumbled through the resistance band drills under her silent supervision. Sheila didn't shout, didn't correct them aloud, just jotted their time, exhaled softly through her nose, and moved on with that same controlled rhythm. That's when Corporal Mason Vaught decided to make himself noticed. He stepped into her space the way some men do when they mistake arrogance for charm. Casual posture disguising something deliberate. Late 20s, short haircut, shoulders built for attention, and a smirk stitched at the corner of his mouth like it had survived on ego alone. "Ma'am," he said, stretching theatrically, "heard you're here on breathing issues. Asthma, right?" He didn't wait for an answer. Didn't know SEALs came in inhaler models. Sheila didn't react. Her gaze dropped to his stance, feet misaligned, knees off. Then to his grip, too tight on the resistance band. She raised her clipboard, made a note, and kept walking. Behind her, Vaught chuckled. "Guess it's true what they say. Rehab's just ghosts with paperwork." She stopped, turned halfway, just enough for her voice to carry. "You're rolling your knees inward on every rep," she said evenly. "That's where you're losing power. Not your lungs, your control." Then she walked on. At the medical desk, Nurse Bramley was organizing oxygen tanks, eyes never leaving her work. "Fun fact," she called over to Vaught. She used to run breath hold drills for combat divers, the kind where they black out at 6 minutes and she's still holding. He raised an eyebrow. "That true, Commander?" Sheila didn't even glance back. "You'll find out soon enough." He smirked, taking it as a game, maybe flirtation. But it wasn't a game. It was a warning, one he either didn't catch or refused to. The stopwatch around. Sheila's. Neck ticked through another rep cycle, her breathing. Still slow, still silent. And Vought had just volunteered for a lesson he wouldn't understand until everything went dark and the air was gone, and she was still there. The next morning, sunlight poured through the skylights, catching on chrome frames and mirrored walls, turning the gym into a reflection of discipline and quiet reckoning. Soft music played in the background, slow and steady, keeping pace with the rhythm of controlled breathing. The faint hum of the air filtration vents filled the gaps between sound. Everything smelled faintly of chlorine and metal polish, that unmistakable scent of discipline and recovery. Lieutenant Commander Sheila Rains moved between stations with her clipboard in hand, making silent notes as recruits cycled through the hydroweight drills. Here, control wasn't suggested. It was mandatory. Breathing, posture, pacing. Every motion counted. But Corporal Mason Vought didn't do control. He arrived late, loud, towel hanging off one shoulder, carrying the swagger of a man who still thought charm could replace rank. The rest of the group had already started partner carries, but Vought cut in, snatching up a free resistance bar and locking eyes on her. "Morning, ma'am," he said, stretching lazily. "Heard today's about balance and breath. Perfect combo, huh?" She didn't answer, only gestured toward the hydro bags lined at the pool's edge. "Form teams of 2, she said. "Your short one, Corporal, pair with me." The group fell silent, tension rippling through the water. Vought smirked. "Lucky me." They stepped into formation. Sheila's stance was textbook. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees aligned, hands loose but ready. He mimicked her, exaggerating every move like a parody. "Controlled lifts," she instructed evenly. "Half pace down, half pace up. Don't fight the water, feel it." For the first few reps, he played along. Then the need to compete took over. He sped up, jerking the bar harder, sending water splashing over her boots. She didn't react. He mistook that for permission. "Careful, Commander," he muttered, just loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. "Wouldn't want to trigger that inhaler mid-demo." A few quick glances darted his way. No one laughed. Sheila adjusted her grip. "The only thing triggered right now," she said quietly, "is your lack of control." Her voice stayed level. An instruction, not a threat. He grinned, trying to recover. "Guess we'll see about that." On the next rep, he pushed it too far. His elbow brushed against her ribs. Once, light enough to seem accidental. Then again, harder, testing her boundaries without realizing how close he was to crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Sheila pivoted slightly, ready to correct her footing, but before she could reset, Vought moved in, one arm slipping casually, then deliberately, around her shoulders. "Let me show you proper posture," he said, his forearm settling just beneath her throat. Every muscle in the room went rigid. It wasn't tight. Not yet. But everyone understood the message. It wasn't about form, it was about power, about humiliation. Sheila's breathing didn't change. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the mat with a dull thud. For one steady second, her palm hovered near his wrist, not grabbing, not resisting, just measuring. Then, with one small exact motion, she stepped forward. Her weight shifted. His footing slipped on the wet tile. The hold broke before anyone even realized what had happened. She bent, picked up her clipboard, and continued the drill as if nothing had occurred. "Maintain spacing," she said evenly. "Next rep begins in 3, 2. Vought blinked, disoriented by her calmness, trying to piece together how he'd lost control so fast. The recruits followed her count automatically, afraid to even glance in her direction. When the set ended, she didn't look at him. "You're off rhythm, Corporal," she said. Breath and control aren't the same thing. Learn the difference. He forced a grin, but it faltered almost immediately. There was something deeply unsettling about how quiet she remained, how her silence seemed to record everything. Because it was. Every twitch of his hand, every word he'd said, catalogued behind that still expression. As the others cooled down, Vaught leaned against the bench, rubbing the wrist she'd thrown off balance. "Guess the stories were true," he muttered. "She's harder to break than she looks." From across the room, without turning, Sheila spoke. "And easier to time than you think." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if it was coincidence or precision. Either way, no one laughed. The air had changed. The humor was gone. Near the hydration station, recruit First Class Maya Chen refilled her bottle slowly, eyes locked on the scene. 3 years in the Navy had taught her to recognize the difference between someone watching and someone recording. Every jab Vaught threw, every test he set, Sheila noted, not out of anger, but out of cold, perfect calculation. Chen had seen instructors lose their temper before, seen them bark orders, file reports, make threats, pull rank just to reassert control. But this was something else entirely. Sheila wasn't reacting to Vaught. She was constructing something around him, methodically, piece by piece, something he couldn't yet recognize closing in. As Chen passed by, she caught Sheila's gaze for half a second. No nod, no signal. Just that steady, unreadable stare that made you realize you'd already been assessed, categorized, and quietly stored away for later. Setting her bottle down, Chen made a silent note to herself. When this situation finally snapped, she wanted to be nowhere near the blast zone. The medical annex occupied a quieter wing of the Bayfield Naval Recovery Center, 2 corridors away from the gym and an entire world apart in mood. The walls were matte, lights dim, the silence thicker. Not anticipation, but waiting. Lieutenant Commander Sheila Raines sat on the edge of a diagnostic bench, jacket unzipped, undershirt damp with leftover sweat. Electrodes clung to her collarbone and ribs, connected to the spirometry monitor beside her. Across the room, Dr. Felix Turner, mid-50s, ex-Navy, now a civilian contractor, adjusted the lung analyzer with deliberate precision. He didn't waste time on small talk. He already knew who sat in front of him. "Deep breath in," he said, eyes on the monitor. "Hold 3, 2, exhale slowly." She obeyed, smooth and controlled. No wheeze, just that subtle catch behind the sternum. The machine chirped and graphed her results. Turner frowned. "Down 4% since last week. Not critical, but you're edging toward restriction range." Sheila peeled off the sensors one by one. "It'll bounce back." Turner didn't reply. Opening a drawer, he flipped through her chart. "Cold air, chemical fumes, stress, your main triggers." She stood, rolling her shoulders. "Stress isn't the problem." Turner raised a brow. "No?" Her eyes met his. "People who cause it are." A quiet snort left him. Not laughter, not approval, just recognition. "You running drills again?" he asked. "Observing them," she answered. He nodded toward her white armband. "That's not what your protocol says." She didn't respond. The silence lingered, heavy and deliberate, the kind that said both of them knew the truth and neither intended to speak it aloud. Then Turner leaned back against the counter, arms folded loosely. "You know, I read your file," he said. "Kandahar blast, collapsed lung. Didn't even let the corpsman sedate you." Sheila gave a slow nod. "I stayed awake during extraction, gave them coordinates, kept the team moving." He studied her for a moment. "You had what?" less than 40% lung capacity, and still held your breath long enough to swim to the evac boat. That right? She hesitated. 38. Turner scratched at his chin. That's not physical, Commander. That's psychological discipline. Most people panic at 15 seconds. You trained for 6 minutes. Sheila leaned back against the counter, eyes distant. In Coronado, we ran blackout drills. Duct-taped masks, no air, no visuals. The trick isn't how long you hold. It's how quiet you get while you're doing it. Her voice faded slightly, her mind already gone elsewhere. For a moment, she wasn't in the medical annex anymore. She was back under 200 pounds of rubble in Kandahar. Lungs collapsed, ribs cracked, dust choking the air. The corpsman had been shouting at her to stop moving, to let them handle it. But the Taliban were 50 meters out, and her unit didn't know the route had been compromised. So she'd keyed the radio with a broken hand and whispered grid coordinates through a punctured lung. 38% lung function. No morphine. Just control. Her CO's voice had crackled back through the static. Control isn't silence. It's command. She'd stayed conscious for the full medevac, directing her own extraction as if pain were just another obstacle to manage. Later, the medics told her most people black out from that kind of agony. She'd only looked at them like they didn't understand. Passing out was a decision. She'd made a different one. Turner was watching her carefully now. "Thinking about Kandahar?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said quietly, "that some lessons don't expire." He closed her chart with a soft thud. "You're good, Commander, but not unbreakable. If someone hits you wrong out there, especially in that pool, your chest won't just ache. It'll lock." She drew in a shallow, deliberate breath through her nose. "I'll stay vertical." "Yeah," he said softly, "but remember, oxygen's not loyalty. It doesn't wait around forever." She turned toward the door. "Hey," he added, stopping her. "Why keep doing this? You've got clearance. You could have gone home 6 months ago." She looked back at him, eyes steady, voice calm. "Because not everyone learns from breathing," she said. "Some only learn from running out of it." Then she left. Down the long corridor, Sheila's boots struck the tile in perfect rhythm. Steady, calm, precise. Her lungs were tight, yes, but her mind unshakable. That evening, the mess hall hummed with its usual background noise. Metal trays sliding along rails, boots clattering on linoleum, the occasional burst of laughter bouncing off steel walls. Rows of uniforms filled the benches, every shade of fatigue on display. Recovery might have been the mission, but ego still ate just as often as protein. Lieutenant Commander Sheila Raines sat near the rear windows, her tray untouched, a small stack of rosters in front of her. She flipped each page slowly, one breath per name, a quiet ritual to keep her rhythm even. Across the hall, Corporal Mason Vaught's voice broke the air. "Evening, Commander," he called, raising a bottle of electrolyte water in mock salute. "Heard you're supervising the breath-hold trials tomorrow." She didn't look up. One of the Marines at his table leaned toward him. "You volunteering?" Vaught smirked and leaned back, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Hell yeah. If she can outbreathe me, I'll salute her on the spot. But if she blacks out first, she's off this base." A ripple of laughter followed, not cruel, just contagious. He grinned wider, eyes fixed on her tray. "Unless that asthma's got a waiver for drowning." The laughter faded fast. Sheila said nothing. She simply underlined a line in the top file, flipped the page, and continued reading. At the far end of the hall, Petty Officer Cole Mercer watched in silence, broad-shouldered, a faint scar along his chin, a souvenir from a diving bell malfunction years ago. He'd seen the pool roster that morning. Vaught's name wasn't on it. Now it was. When the crowd thinned, Mercer approached her table. "Commander," he said quietly, "you sure about this?" She didn't look up. "He signed the waiver." "I know," Mercer replied, lowering his voice, "but there's a difference between pushing a candidate and baiting a trap." "I didn't bait him," she said evenly. "No?" "I opened a pool," she said, sliding a document across to him. "He chose to drown." The paper bore the updated endurance trial roster, stamped and logged. Vaught was now candidate number 3. She tapped 2 fields: Supervisor, Lieutenant Sheila Raines; Observer, Petty Officer Cole Mercer. Mercer exhaled slowly. "You want me recording?" "I want you watching," she replied. He nodded. "We live streaming to command?" "Yes." Comms feed starts 5 minutes before the trial. Video auto logs, pool lights at training dim. He studied her face for a moment. Calm, collected, measured. And somewhere deep in that composure he saw it, the quiet certainty that this wasn't just a test. It was the inevitable conclusion of one. Full submersion visibility. Mercer confirmed as he folded the paper and slid it into his sleeve. Heart rate monitors active on all divers. Trigger alarm at sustained bradycardia below 42. His eyes flicked up, studying her. The steadiness of her tone, the calm precision of her movements. "You think he's going to try something?" "He's not used to being under control," Sheila replied, "especially not someone else's." She stood, posture exact. "That's why I'm not trying anything. I'm just waiting." Mercer gave her a long look. "And if he makes contact?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gathered her tray, carried it to the bin, and slid it in without a sound. When she turned back, her voice was flat, final, pure command. "Then I'll teach him what a controlled exhale can do to a man who mistakes pressure for power." That night, she double-checked the camera feeds, synced the biometric monitors, filed every waiver, and secured the neck weight brackets. By morning, the pool would be ready, and Vaught would walk into a room where the only air he could rely on would belong to her. The pool sat in silence that night, the kind of silence that crept into concrete and made every ripple feel like a breach in discipline. Blue LEDs pulsed softly along the floor, a slow rhythm meant to steady nerves and breathing. Lieutenant Commander Sheila Raines stood beside the starting blocks, black compression shirt tucked neatly, stopwatch dangling from her hand, hair pinned back, sleeves rolled, every detail controlled. She was the first in the water. Vaught arrived with wet boots and a borrowed wetsuit that didn't zip all the way. He flexed his shoulders like a performer before an audience. 2 techs followed from the physiology lab, tasked with tracking vitals and pulling the safety rope if things went wrong. "Evening, Commander," Vaught said, voice slick with mock confidence. "Try not to fog the goggles when you pass out." She didn't respond, only turned toward the techs. "Standard submersion drill," she said evenly. "No breath assist, no weights. Surface taps allowed. Stopwatch starts at full submersion. Exit only on signal or failure to maintain." Vaught grinned. "Failure to maintain? That's just medical talk for blacking out." Behind the glass in the ops booth, Petty Officer Cole Mercer stood with his arms crossed, watching the vitals stream across the monitors. His finger hovered near the comms panel, ready. Sheila stepped to the pool's edge, adjusted her mask, and slid into the water without a ripple. Vaught followed with a loud cannonball, laughing as he surfaced. "Ready to hold your breath, Commander?" She didn't reply, just dipped under in one smooth, clean motion. The water closed over her like glass. For a moment, the world went silent. Blue light rippled across the tiles. They floated 6 feet apart, shadows drifting. Sheila had already slowed her body into what Mercer would later recognize on the data logs as pre-collapse mode. Heart rate dropping. Diaphragm still. Oxygen draw minimal. Vought, on the other hand, was struggling. His legs twitched every few seconds as he fought for balance. He kept glancing sideways, trying to make sense of her stillness, not realizing it wasn't endurance. It was mastery. At 26 seconds, he shifted closer. At 31, closer still. Then at 36, without warning, he lunged, his hand locking hard around Sheila's throat from behind. From the control booth, an alert chimed. "Motion spike," Mercer muttered, leaning forward. The assistants froze, unsure if what they were seeing was still part of protocol, or the moment everything changed. Underwater, Vought tightened his grip. He expected resistance, thrashing, bubbles, panic. Instead, nothing. Sheila didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead, lips pressed tight, breath sealed inside her lungs. No air escaped, no fear. She became even stiller, as if turning herself invisible within the water. Her heart rate dropped by another 4 beats. Her diaphragm stayed motionless. The only thing she focused on was his hand. He squeezed again, harder. She let him. At 44 seconds, something shifted. Vaught's eyes darted, not with dominance this time, but confusion. She was still conscious, still calm, still waiting. And then she moved. Her left hand shot up, wrapping around his wrist. One foot braced against the pool floor. With a clean, violent torque, she twisted outward, dragging his arm across her body in a lock that forced bone against muscle. The sound was faint but sharp, a muted pop that carried even underwater. Behind the glass, Mercer winced. "That's a dislocation," he muttered. Sheila released him and turned with fluid precision, surfacing in one smooth motion. Half a second later, Vought burst through the water, coughing and clutching his arm, eyes wild with shock. By then, Sheila was already climbing out, water streaming down her sleeves. Her breathing. Steady, no wheeze, no tremor, just perfect control. The assistants rushed to Vought, who sat slumped by the pool's edge, gasping. Confusion etched across his face. Sheila stood by the control board, pulled off her mask, and glanced toward Mercer behind the glass. He gave her a slow nod, no words, no praise. She didn't need any. Her breath filled the silence, slow and even, while behind her, the man who had panicked now sat defeated, drenched, and broken by his own arrogance. Water dripped from Mason Vaught's elbow as he slouched against the far wall, one arm curled to his chest, the other braced weakly behind him. His face was pale, streaked with chlorine and disbelief. Every few seconds he tried to flex his fingers, testing what no longer worked. Lieutenant Commander Sheila Raines stood a few feet away, towel slung over her shoulder, black compression shirt clinging to her back. Her eyes were dry. Her breathing, audible now in the post-drill quiet, was slow, deliberate, measured. Not even the faintest rasp. One of the assistants knelt beside Vought. "Sir, we need to assess the joint. That wrist might be—" "She broke it," Vought muttered bitterly, snapped it underwater. The second assistant turned toward Sheila. "Commander?" Without looking up, she answered evenly. He applied a chokehold during a no-contact exercise. I responded with joint manipulation, not force. Her tone was calm, clinical, final. And behind her, the only sound that remained was the steady rhythm of her breathing. The same breath that had ended the fight long before he ever realized he'd lost it. "Check the camera log," Vought snapped, voice cracking through the tension. "You initiated contact. You used me to prove a point." Sheila turned her head slightly, her tone level, almost detached. The point was already proven, Corporal. You just didn't notice it happening. The door hissed open behind them. Petty Officer Cole Mercer entered, carrying a printed readout from the control booth and a med kit. "Vitals captured everything," he said calmly. "She never crossed anaerobic threshold, held her breath the entire time." Vaught blinked, disbelief written across his face. "That wasn't training, that was instruction," Sheila interrupted softly. "You grabbed someone who trains operators to control hypoxia while hanging from helicopters at night. You thought it was a game. I treated it like a test." Mercer crouched beside Vaught, checked his pulse, then began unrolling a flexible wrist brace. "Pulse spiking, pupils dilated," he said. "You're in an adrenaline crash." "I'm filing an incident report," Vaught growled through clenched teeth. "You'll need a working wrist to do it," Sheila replied, without missing a beat. Mercer bit back a smile. "Pool comm feed's been backing up to command since 2100, he added. "Includes underwater visuals, we've got everything." The assistant stepped back quietly. No one else spoke. Sheila crossed to the far side of the deck, methodically removing her gear. She spread her towel flat, placed her mask at its center, folded the strap neatly on top. Every movement clean, deliberate, precise. "Commander," Mercer said, approaching. "Vitals log shows your heart rate dipped to 42 at peak pressure." She glanced at him. "And? You didn't even enter the stress zone." She tightened her wrist strap, exhaled slowly through her nose. "He thought I'd fight back, that I'd panic." Mercer nodded slightly. "Instead, I let him run out of options." Turning to the assistants, Sheila continued, her tone pure command. "Secure the pool. Flag the drill file under escalation protocol. Tomorrow's training is suspended until command reviews the footage." They nodded, still silent, still stunned. Vaught sat motionless, eyes fixed on the tile near his boots. He hadn't moved since surfacing. Sheila didn't offer him a hand. She walked past Mercer, her steps sharp and steady. "Keep a copy of the log," she said. "He'll claim it didn't happen like this." Mercer gave a short nod. "Already backed up?" he said quietly. By the time her footsteps faded down the hall, the only sound left was the steady echo of her breath, calm, controlled, unbroken. As Sheila stepped into the hallway, the only sound that followed her was the measured click of her boots and the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing, the sound of someone who had never once lost control. Command Room 4 wasn't designed for drama, no flags, no banners, just concrete walls, matte gray paint, and a regulation table surrounded by metal chairs that looked as uncomfortable as the conversations held there. A monitor hummed quietly at the far end of the room. Frozen on a time-stamped frame. Two figures suspended underwater, one still, the other reaching. Captain David Lorne, base operations lead, stood at the head of the table reviewing a printed report. Silver hair, sharp jaw, and a presence that made interruptions impossible. To his left sat Lieutenant Commander Sheila Raines, posture straight, uniform crisp, medical armband still visible but untouched. Across from her, Corporal Mason Vaught sat rigid, his wrist bandaged and strapped in a brace, arm secured in a sling. His jaw pulsed with every swallow, tension radiating through his shoulders. Behind Sheila, Petty Officer Cole Mercer stood silently, a calm witness to the storm that was about to unfold. Captain Lorne pressed play, the room filled with the muted rush of bubbles, distorted microphone static, and rhythmic beeping from the vitals feed. The footage rolled for 49 seconds. Then came the lunge, the choke, the counter, and the quiet, unmistakable pop. When it ended, the silence wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Lorne looked up from the screen. "Corporal Vaught," he said evenly, "is that you initiating contact?" "She was provoking me," Vaught shot back. "She baited that reaction. You saw it. She didn't respond to anything during the drills. She wanted me to snap." Lorne tilted his head slightly. "So, you believe a superior officer maintaining composure under protocol is provocation? She knew what she was doing. And you didn't?" Vaught hesitated, jaw clenching. "I thought it was just a drill." "It was," Mercer interjected, stepping forward. "Sir, the biometric logs confirm no spike in Commander Rains' vitals. She remained within operational breath-hold range the entire time. No signs of panic. Corporal Vaught, on the other hand, heart rate spike at 36 seconds, choke initiated at 44, joint dislocation at 48. He violated 3 levels of protocol: proximity, contact, and obstruction." Lorne turned to Sheila. "Why didn't you surface or call for assistance?" "I didn't need to," she replied evenly. "You were under pressure. I've been under worse." Vaught gave a bitter laugh. "She let me attack her just to prove a point." Sheila turned her gaze toward him, steady, unflinching. "I didn't let you," she said quietly. "I measured you." "I didn't let you," Sheila said quietly, her voice even but final. "I measured you." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Captain Lorne closed the folder in front of him. "Corporal Vaught," he said, tone clipped and cold, "you are hereby removed from the candidate evaluation track. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to administrative duty pending further review. You will not return to the rehabilitation floor, nor initiate any contact with Commander Rains." Vaught stiffened, his good hand curling into a fist. "You can't—" "I can," Lorne cut in, "and I just did." Then his attention shifted to Sheila. "You could have filed formal assault charges." She gave a single, steady nod. "Didn't need to." "Why not?" Her eyes flicked briefly toward the paused frame on the screen. 2 figures underwater, one still, one reaching. "Because the air always tells the truth," she said, "and he ran out of it before I did." Mercer couldn't help the faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lorne tapped a note into his tablet. "This review will be submitted to Central Command with full recording attached. Commander Rains, your conduct met and exceeded protocol. Your restraint under direct threat is noted and will be documented accordingly." Sheila inclined her head once. "Thank you, sir." Lorne stood. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as the others filed out. The monitor dimmed to black. Vaught remained seated, staring at the ground, the sling on his arm feeling heavier by the second. As Sheila passed him, she paused only for a moment. No venom in her tone, no triumph in her eyes. "It wasn't your throat you lost the fight with," she said quietly. "It was your timing." She didn't wait for an answer. By the time Vaught looked up again, she was already gone. Breath steady, control unbroken, legacy secured. The next morning, the rehab gym hummed with its usual rhythm. Weights clanking, quiet orders from the overhead speakers, the soft thud of boots on padded flooring. But there was something different in the air. It wasn't the temperature or the schedule. It was the silence. Sharper, more focused. Attention unspoken but visible in posture. When Lieutenant Commander Sheila Rains entered, no one turned their head, yet everyone adjusted. Shoulders straightened, straps tightened. Movements became more deliberate, more precise. No one mentioned it, but everyone knew. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't carry herself like someone who had won anything. She just moved the same way she always did, measured, silent, surgical, clipboard in hand, stopwatch hanging loosely by her thumb. A few yards away, 2 Navy recruits whispered near the treadmill rack. "That's her," one murmured, the one who didn't even flinch. "Held her breath through a choke," the other replied. "Didn't break, didn't blink." "She didn't win the fight," the first said quietly. "She let him lose it." Across the room, Petty Officer Cole Mercer passed by, a folded report in his hand. His eyes met Sheila's for a moment. "Guess calm really is your superpower," he said under his breath. She lifted an eyebrow. "Not calm," she corrected softly. "Calculation." That was all she said. She took her place near the pool deck, watching a recruit adjust his stance mid-squat. She didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly. He corrected instantly. By then, the whisper had already spread across the gym. She wasn't the instructor who taught them how to fight. She was the one who taught them how to stay conscious. No one laughed that morning, not once. And somewhere across the compound, Corporal Mason Vaught sat at an admin desk, typing slowly with one good hand, eyes fixed on the screen, haunted by silence he couldn't outlast. Would you have panicked if someone grabbed you by the throat underwater? Or could you stay calm long enough to let control win the fight? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reminded you that real strength isn't about shouting, but about breathing, hit that like button, subscribe with the bell icon turned on so you never miss a mission like this. And share this story with someone who still thinks silence means surrender. Because we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And your next mission's already appearing on screen. This is Major Tom's Tales.